Greetings, everyone. This is your host, Josh here. Happy to say that the Transnatural Perspectives podcast is brought to us by listeners like you. If you find value in this show and you want to help it grow, please consider sharing this podcast, writing a review, and supporting the show. Head on over to transnaturalperspectives.com to learn more about how you can contribute as a monthly subscriber, as a one-time donor, as well as check out our blog. I invite you to contact me with any ideas you have for the show. If you'd like to be a guest, if you need a writer, or any other tips on further funding opportunities. I'd really love to hear from you. It keeps this show going, it keeps me going. And with that being said, thanks for listening.
So you say, ecological economics, learning from nature. How can we organize society based on quality of life and sustainable connections to nature and culture?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Transnatural Perspectives podcast. This is the show where we put nature in focus while sharing perspectives on society and culture across environments and landscapes. I'm your host, Josh Bennett, recording live here in Oslo, Norway, bringing you conversations with researchers, artists, activists, and all kinds of other people from all around the world who are here to share their experiences and their efforts, give us some inspiration and some tools that we need so that you and me and we and everyone else can start working together towards a socially and ecologically sustainable future today. As we like to say, we must attack the issues of social and ecological injustice at large, from wherever we may sit or stand. Just some quick transnatural pod news before we get into our interview today. Breaking news. So, one of the other roots of this podcast, which is continually growing, is the translation of these conversations into other forms of media, which is slowly sprouting on our show blog, available right over there at our website, transnaturalperspectives.com. But this pod is not just limited to the blog. Oh no, we are branching out all over the place. Yes, branching out, I'm happy to say we've got a new article out now with the Earth Island Journal, which is based on a conversation I had with Welsh wild swimmer and conservationist Laura Owen Sanderson, all about wild swimming, purposeful adventure, and water conservation. There we discussed Laura's efforts to heal her chronic illness via cold water wild swimming, while leading an epic journey across all of UK's national parks, testing for microplastic as she's swimming. You might remember this episode, and if you don't, go back and listen to it after you've listened to this episode. The article is called Swim to Heal, and you can find that online at the Earth Island Journal website, or also over there on transnaturalperspectives.com. Thanks to Laura for the conversation. Thanks to earthisland.org for publishing, and thanks to the Friction Collective for providing those awesome photos. This podcast is writing. This host, me, we're writing. And if you'd like to have any of these topics you hear about expanded upon on your blog or in your magazine or your journal or wherever, be sure to shoot me a message over at the website. Hit me up on social media. Anywhere you'd like to shout out, I'd love to shout back at you. All right, everybody. Now, on to today's show. On today's show, we're going to be talking about something that's so important. I don't think we've discussed it so much on the show thus far, and that is economics. Now, hold up a second don't turn me off yet. We're talking about ecological economics, in fact. And I recently sat down in the virtual studio with someone who is actually in the same time zone for once, and that is my friend, Dr. Ove Daniel Jakobsen. He's an ecological economist who teaches and conducts research at the business school in North Norway at Nord University, all the way up there in the town of Bodø, all the way up there above the Arctic Circle. So Ove has dedicated his life to the study of ecological economics, and he's written many books on the topic, including his latest, Anarchism and Ecological Economics. As we will find out, ecological economics takes a transdisciplinary approach to the topic of economics, which connects ecology, sociology, culture, rural studies, and more, while taking a holistic, decentralized, community-led, bottom-up approach in designing more sustainable economy for both humans and the inhabitants of the more-than-human world. Throughout this intensive yet quick conversation, we're going to go over the roots of ecological economics, universal conceptions of what the good life means, demystifying utopia and why it's practical and necessary. We're also going to talk about why greenwashing and harm reduction can be problematic, the role of optimism in individual development and system change, crushing capitalism and eco-anarchism, and a whole lot more. So before we get into this, I'd recommend keeping a little notebook or some kind of device nearby, because Ove drops a plethora of key terms and references during our talk that has definitely had me going back for further research. As well, see what questions come out of this, as Ove has already agreed that he'll be back for another episode in the future where we'll be able to answer questions from the audience. So I think that reshaping not only the structure of our economies, but also our perceptions is vital to social and ecological sustainability. And that's why I'm really happy to bring you this talk with ecological economist, Dr. Ove Daniel Jakobsen. So enjoy, everybody, and see you on the other side for some reflections. Welcome to the show, Ove. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. So, I was really interested to talk with you today because I found, we've talked before in the past, and I kind of discovered you on the internet simply from typing in the Google search, like ecological economics. I was curious what kind of theories exist on this, and then I came to find out this is what you do, and we live in the same country. So this is pretty amazing to have a hometown hero right here on the podcast.
Good, great.
I'm just a little curious, just to get started off, with some of the basics, because, on this podcast, we talk a lot about the different intersections that we find in society that intersect with the ideas of social, cultural, and ecological sustainability. And one thing we haven't talked so much, to be honest, on here is about the economy, which, could arguably be one of the most important parts of putting all of these pieces together. So I'm just a little curious. Maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit about, what you teach up there and what you research up there in the north of Norway.
Yeah. First of all, ecological economics started as a university topic in 1989 in the USA, Maryland University. In Norway, in Bodø, we started teaching and research in ecological economics in 1995, so we were very early. But ecological economics have a long history before it was established as a university topic. So I usually start with Aristotle, 2,500 years back in time. But I think it's more relevant to start in the late 18th century, where we have, for example, Kropotkin saying that the economy should be based upon an organic worldview. And this was very interesting because traditional economy, classical and neoclassical economics, is based upon a mechanistic way of thinking. And the traditional economy is also based upon a positivistic, very often positivistic idea about science. We try to explain things in a reductionistic way. We try to explain the cause and effects, isolate different topics. But in ecological economics, in an organic worldview, everything is integrated. And when everything is integrated, the scientific perspective saying that we have many different sciences, different fields of science. In ecological economics, we talk about transdisciplinarity. That means that the economy could not be understood without knowledge in ecology, for example. and it could not be understood without knowledge about culture and society. And here we meet a very interesting problem, because in most business schools all over the world, ecology and knowledge about society and human beings are not part of the curriculum. So therefore, one very important part when I teach ecological economics is to introduce to the students knowledge about ecology, biology, and also these different fields of knowledge in society and also culture. But transdisciplinarity is not to integrate its different fields of science. It is in a way to eliminate the borders between them. And to do that, I very often go out into practice to meet people in the living world, because in the living world there are no borders between things. Every human being have a potential for development, and every local society have a potential for development. And through methods connected to dialogue, use dialogue as a methodological input here, then we can open up for this transdisciplinary development. So that is part of my research. How can we understand the challenges we are facing today? For example, explained through the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the UN. How can we integrate these things and try to understand how they are integrated and come up with solutions that we can find a synergy effect between the different projects? And this is, in a way, a criticism towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, because here we have split it up. The sustainable development is in many different directions, and they could be in conflict with each other. One of the goals is to increase economic growth, but maybe economic growth is the reason behind some of the other problems. And poverty is another thing connected to environmental degradation and so on and so forth. So the idea here is, how can we understand have a more total understanding of how everything is integrated? And now we are in the inner circle of ecological economics. We try to develop methodology. We try to develop knowledge that are integrated. And now you understand the criticisms from traditional economists is this ecological economics is not economy, because we talk about many different things. We talk about economy not as the end, but as a mean in a way. We must have some economical platform, but the good life is not economy. The good life is integration, is relations with nature and with other people, and so on and so forth. So maybe that was a short introduction, a brief introduction to what ecological economics could be.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think that's what's so interesting about this concept of ecological economics is that, like you said, and as I've seen in some of your work and in your lectures, putting, nature or the ecology in focus. Yeah, I think that this is kind of, you're using the study and like the theories of like economics to kind of approach that issue or approach that issue from like an ecological, ecocentric viewpoint. So it seems to me. Do you have any examples? Like you said, you try to integrate this into your studies, but also like your teaching and in classes and whatnot in the business school. So how does that work with, students perhaps?
Yeah, we have courses on all levels, from bachelor, master, and also on PhD level. So today, most of the activities are on PhD level. So I have a few PhD students working with ecological economics, where they try to connect the development of theories and understanding with practical examples. But it's very interesting today that we have developed something that we call a utopian dialogue. And I think utopian dialogues have a long history. It started with Thomas More in England in 1516. He said, to understand the English society, we have to take a step outside the existing society and take a look from outside. And that was utopia. So utopia means another place. And we have developed a methodology here where we meet people in the local society, in a company, could be, in an organization, but most of all, local societies. We meet people, they come up with their histories, tell stories, narratives about examples for how the good life in the practical setting. And from these examples, from these stories, we try to find some values that are most important. And when we have been doing this, it's called a Socratic dialogue. So we have an interpretation, in a way, of a Socratic dialogue. And the Socratic dialogue was based on the German philosopher Leonard Nelson. He developed this method about 100 years ago, in the 18th century. And from these fundamental values that people, bottom-up initiative, people tell their stories, we come up with some ideas from their stories. It's very important. It's not experts that tell other people what their values should be. They tell themselves through histories what are the main parts of the good life in a good society. From that, we go over in an open space, a version of dialogue, where they come up with projects where they try to translate these values into practical action. And this practical action could be many different things. It could be connected to economic development. It could be to social practices and other things. But the main thing here is that we say that all people, as I said, have a potential. The local society have a potential. And we try to make this explicit and translate it into action. And this is working. And in Norway today, we are working in several different small communities with these projects. So you can say that ecological economics is in a way been part of some experiments. It's not a dominating part of the Norwegian economy or society. It's a small part of it, but it's growing. And I usually say it's better to be part of a growing minority than in a majority that is disappearing. So now we have to unite on the positive development connected to these bottom-up initiatives. People must be part of the development. They must not be the distance between ordinary people and the people at the top of the system. We must reduce that, and we must eliminate that. We must let people be part of the process.
All right. Yeah, it sounds like it's a very ecologically based kind of organic, like you say, from the bottom up process. That's
the way the ecosystems are working. Self-organizing system in nature. So therefore the name Ecological Economics. Ecological Economics is inspired by how the nature or the ecosystems is working. It's not to treat the nature in a good way, but learn from nature. How can we organize the economy? And what we learn is, for example, we must develop networks, decentralized, cooperative networks, instead of atomized competition between autonomous actors, as it is described in traditional economy. And we must also have these bottom-up initiatives instead of top-down. And we also talk about qualitative development instead of quantitative growth, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is, when we understand how nature is working, and when we understand how culture is part of our lives, then we can develop some interesting economical projects. So you say, ecological economics, learning from nature. How can we organize a society based on quality of life and sustainable connections to nature and culture?
This is, I love this. This is like this is exactly what we're talking about. A very incredible way to approach the research and action of, what an economy could look like or should look like. Like, just to go a little deeper into that real quick, from your research, what have been some of these good life values that people have talked about? And perhaps you could also tell us a little bit how this has been put into action, like if you have some specific projects you're thinking of.
Yeah. We have, when we arrange these utopian dialogues, we invite people from the local society, young people, old people, working, people without work, from different cultural backgrounds, and so on and so forth. And one of the last places we have this, the arrangement was in Trondheim, in Norway. And here different people from different, as I said, a variation, the representative from the population in this local society, in the part of the city. And they start telling their stories about how they experienced the good life. And the interesting thing is, in all our dialogues, in small communities, in big cities, everywhere, people start talking about the connection to other people. Relations are more important than objects, is the essence here. So to have a good society, we must develop relations between people. We must have meeting places, low-cost meeting places where you can do things together. Everywhere they say this is important for having a good life. We must have relations to nature. We must be part of the living nature. We must accept that we are not outside the ecosystems. We are part of the ecosystems, and we have to behave in that way. So the interesting thing is, when we have these dialogues and people come up with projects, they never talk about the good life as having more television sets or bigger cars or things like that. They always talk about we must have a better society where we are interconnected, where we have communication, both physically, with buses and trams and all these things, but also through dialogue. We must meet people, do things together, and we must have a dialogue with nature. We must connect to nature. And here is my interpretation of ecological economics. I know that many researchers in ecological economics would say that this is not part of the paradigm. But I say we have something to learn from the Indian philosophy, from the Eastern philosophy, saying that to change the system, we have to do something with our own consciousness. So it's a connection between individual development of consciousness and systems change of system. These two things are interconnected. And it's very interesting that it also interconnects our global Earth, because then we connect with the Eastern philosophy and our Western philosophy, and we do not have to say that we are better than the other and the other are better than us. We are depending on each other. We have to develop consciousness, be aware of being part of nature, be aware of part of society. Communitarianism from Etzioni says that the society is relations, it has its own existence. In the neoliberal tradition, we say that society is only a sum of individuals. Society is nothing, it's only a collection of individuals. And this is also a very, very important change when you talk about transition from understanding the society and economy as an atomistic competition to integrated cooperative networks. And to do that, we have to develop our consciousness. And there are interesting contributors in ecological economics talking about these things. For example, you talk about a new economy, and maybe you have heard about this, and many others say that to change the system, we have to change the consciousness of the individuals, and vice versa. To change our consciousness, we have to change the system, because we are living in a system that is totally giving priority to materialistic values. And they try to explain or to change from materialistic values into a monetary scale, saying that everything have a price tag. But the interesting thing is, if you say that nature should be part of the economy, everything in nature must have a price tag. And if everything in nature have a price tag, something is missing, and that is the relations between things. And if the relations between these different elements in nature, in ecosystems, are life, then the economic, when we try to integrate it in economy, giving everything a price tag, then we are killing the nature. And I think this is a good explanation behind all the problems we are facing today. We have not discovered the importance of connections, relations. And that is, first of all, in nature, but also in society. So therefore, I think communitarianism from Tai Etzioni is very interesting as an input to understand what ecological economics is all about. It's a change from atomism to integration to holism and to dynamic development, process philosophy in a way.
You're mentioning a lot of different theories coming from different places around the world. You mentioned a lot of Eastern philosophy and throughout Europe. And you also mentioned how, ecological economics kind of got its start in North America. So I'm curious, have there been any kind of other in the world of ecological economics and you having these kind of dialogues with communities? Is there other instances of that around the world that are comparative and produce, similar or maybe different values?
I think one of the interesting examples today is transition towns started in England, Totnes in England in 2005, I think it was. And they say this is a very interesting initiative. They say to change the local society, to change the society, people must be involved. So in transition towns, they work with open space methodology. People meet in cafes or other places, low-cost meeting places, where they discuss, where they have projects, working with different projects together to make change in their own society. So they take responsibility. They say, we want to be part of the change. And transition towns, if you take a look at, try to find out through a Google search, then you will find out that transition initiatives all over the world today. So it has spread in an enormous tempo. People are now trying to change it from the bottom. We are not waiting for the leaders in economy or in politics. We try to start the change movement from the bottom up in a peaceful way. It's very important to say, in a pacifistic, peaceful way. We try to develop good projects integrated with each other, integrated in a living nature. And then I think the politicians and other leaders will see, this is a good idea. Let's try to integrate it in our ideas. And we cannot wait till they come up with that great idea themselves, because it will never happen, I think. But ordinary people, we have this potential, we have these ideas, and we can start working with these kind of projects, and that is meaningful. And I think meaningful. This is also a very interesting concept here. Instead of saying that we are more and more happy the more we consume, I think we can be happy if we have enough of what we need. Enough is enough. In addition to that, we need some meaning in life, and meaning is, per definition, connected to a context. So to have a meaningful life means we have to do something that expand our narrow ego. We have to do something with other people, maybe for other people, or animals for that matter. So here is a possibility. We must have a society where we have enough of what we need: housing, clothes, food, everything, healthy food, so on, grown in a healthy way in the soil, and so on. But we should not increase that exponentially as we are trying to do now. They say that economic growth is a goal in itself. That is the problem. Economic growth is not a goal. Economic production and consumption must be at a certain level. From that, we start develop the qualities. And I very often I give an example. We are born very small, 3 kilos, for example. Then we grow till we are 17, 18 years old. Then we are stop growing, hopefully, physically. And then we develop. We are not stopping the development. And I will say the society is in the same situation. When it had come to an optimal level of production and consumption, then we must focus upon other things than economic growth. We must start focusing upon how can we develop our potential. And as in nature, the qualitative development is connected to increasing the connections. So I had a student, he said, I do not agree with you because I love to play guitar, and the next guitar give me more a happy feeling. 1 guitar, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, and each new guitar gave me a very good feeling, he said. Okay, but then I said, maybe it could be a good feeling to start playing on some of these guitars. When you have 4 or 5, that's enough. You can start playing. And the next level is what I just give an example. Maybe the best thing is to play together with other people, other musicians. So what you say, to have the physical thing is very important. You cannot play the guitar without a guitar, but the more guitars you have, the more time you spend buying these things and take care of them, and the less time you have for the rehearsing. So fewer guitars, more rehearse, and then meet people to do something together with them, make music. That's a good life. So that's a connection between the physical thing and the qualitative development. And I think that example could be transformed into every part of the life. Doing things, expand your capacity or your own potential, and together with others. Then you have the meaningful life when you feel that you are moving. And this is translated to, for example, workplaces. When we talk about healthy workplaces, we always say you must develop work for people that give them opportunity to develop their own potential, and they must also develop possibilities to do this together with other people. And the products you are producing must be valuable for other people. So you feel that you are doing something for the community, not only for your own salary, but you produce something that have meaning in a bigger context. And today, many workplaces produce things that it's less meaning, but it could also be very harmful for ecology and for the society. So this is, you can expand the example to be a part of almost every kind of development.
You've mentioned it a few times now, and I think I would like to clarify this term before we move on, because you said utopia a few times, and I think probably when a lot of people might listen to this idea and say, oh yeah, this sounds very utopian, but how are we going to do it? How's this going? And one thing that I noted when listening to your video that you have online about transformative ecological economics, which anybody listening, I recommend that you go watch that, and I'll put a link for that in the show notes, is that you talk about utopia as actually a practical thing and actually almost like a necessity to kind of like design, the economy and the ecology around. So could you expand upon, how utopian is not just a pie in the sky idea,
It's very interesting. As I said, it started with Thomas More 500 years ago, but it was developed by a Hungarian sociologist, Karl Mannheim, in the 1936, I think it was. He published a book called Ideology and Utopia. And the French philosopher Ricoeur have also a book in 1986, 50 years later, also called Ideology and Utopia. And what they say, and this is very interesting and important, they say that the tension between what is the ideology today and what could be the utopia, the tension between what is and what could be, in other words, ideology and utopia, or in Aristotle's concepts, actuality and potentiality, the tension between these two positions give energy and direction for development. And both of them say that in today's society, we have too little focus on what could be, on the potential. We are only talking about how we can change the ideology in small steps. And the consequence is that the only thing we can do today is to reduce the negative symptoms of the system. We reduce, when we talk about greening the economy, some talk about greenwashing, it's even worse. You do not do something. In reality, you only tell people that you are doing something that you say. But greening the economy means green economy is how can we reduce the negative symptoms of the existing system. But in my opinion, and most people working in ecological economics, they say that the system is the problem. So it's not a good idea to reduce the negative symptoms of a system that should be changed. Therefore, we have to develop an alternative system, and that is the utopia. We develop a system that could solve the problems we are facing today. And the tension between the situation today, the system today, and this other idea, the potential or the how things could be, gives us an idea about the direction of development. And then we come into some other interesting things. Another Hungarian, this time a philosopher, Imre Lakatos, philosophy of science. He says it's two possibilities when you have a system that is in trouble. One thing is you can change the protective belt. And let me give an example of that. He differs between the protective belt and the hard core of a system or a research program. The hard core in our system is economic growth, it's competition, and it's strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is very interesting because it is inspired from the vocabulary of military. There they say we must have a strategy to beat our enemies. We must have a plan to beat our enemies. And in the 1930s, the people in marketing said, this is a very good idea for us. Let's make a plan. How can we beat the competitors on the market? So therefore, they use strategy as a description of a plan. How can we beat the competitors on the market? So instead of talking about strategic planning, competition as a mean to stimulate growth, and focus upon economic growth, then we must change. That is the hard core. And now, Imre Lakatos said it is possible to solve some of the problems if you make changes in the protective belt. And that means that you change from growth, economic growth, to green growth. So today, many people in economy and in politics say, we cannot have this traditional growth. We must have a green growth. But the argument here is, if growth is the problem, it do not solve the problem if you change the color of it. We must do something with it. We must ask critical questions to the hard core. What could we have instead of physical growth on a planet that is not growing? That is logic. It's not possible to have exponential growth in the use of natural resources on a planet that is not growing. Everybody understands it. But the politicians and economists today say, okay, we understand that, but we will not start the process today. We will wait a little bit. And in the meantime, we will have green growth. And when they talk about competition and strategy and all these things, they say we must have an ethical business ethics is a good thing here. We must be ethical. And then the answer from Lakatos, and even stronger. Here comes another philosopher of science, Paul Feyerabend. He says, and I think he's descriptive in a way. He talks about history. All big changes in history comes from people asking questions to the hardcore. Critical thinking is asking questions to things that most people think is obvious. So, in other words, when we talk about ecological economics, we ask critical questions to the hardcore. Why growth? Why growth? And if you ask that question to politicians or other in economy, they very often do not have a very good answer to that. But they say the system is based upon growth. So it must have growth to save the system. To save the system, we must have growth. And to stimulate growth, we must have competition. And then everything is atomized, and you will have a whole lot of negative symptoms, problems, climate change, extinctions of species, all these things. And maybe most important of all, the widening gap between rich and poor. The values on earth are concentrated on fewer and fewer people, and the majority have not very good physical conditions. So we have to do something with that. To do this, we have to think in another way. We have to ask, as Feyerabend says, critical questions to the hardcore to what people think is obvious. We should think about an alternative to physical growth, an alternative to competition, and an alternative to strategic thinking. And here I have inspiration from a German professor in marketing, Waldemar Hopfenbeck. He said in the 1970s that instead of strategic planning in the companies, they should be based upon partnership approach. How to develop the local society together. Different industries together with farming, fisheries, cultural activities, all these things integrated to have a good society, not compete with each other, but integrate and find synergic effects. And that is what happens today in many, many different places all over the world. So I'm very optimistic. And I think we should focus more upon all these positive things that are happening around us instead of always talk about all the problems. Mm-hmm. Today we talk about problems with climate, with problems with everything. Start thinking about, instead of talking about what we should not do, try to find out what we should do. And when we find out how we can behave in the future without coming in conflict with nature and culture and all these things, then we do not have time for all these negative things. So people are not motivated when you say you should not travel abroad, you should not eat this and that, and you should not do this, and you should not do that, you should not drive in your car, you should not. It's not very stimulating. You are not very motivated to do things, but all you hear is you should not do this and that. It's more motivating to say, okay, let's start doing this and that, and develop projects together to come up with these projects. We not ask experts to tell us what can we do. We ask ourselves, what do we want to do? And when we do this together, then we are in a very interesting philosophical tradition called process philosophy, integration, organic thinking, dynamic development, quality of life, and all these things. So it's open. It's on take the opportunity, start doing these things. So you don't have to go on courses in ecological economics. We have it inside. We know what it is. But the system prevents us from doing it, because the system says you have to compete, you have to grow, you have to earn more and more money and increase your consumption. And then people are unhappy, they have problems, and so on and so forth. So Chilean economist Manfred Max Neef have done research in, I think it's more than 30 different countries, and they found out that when the consumption comes to a certain level, satisfaction with life decrease. So there is an optimum for a materialistic consumption, but there is no optimum for development of quality of life. So as we started with today, it could be the example with our own how our own body is growing is a good example of the society. We grow to a certain level when we have the right size. We are able to do everything that we want. Are we too big or are we too small? Then we have problems. We have to have good food. We have to have exercise. We have to do things to be in physical good shape. But that is not the only thing. When we are in good shape, we have the possibilities, we have the opportunity to start doing things that connect us to the meaningful life, to quality of life. So it's a different, the welfare, materialistic welfare is not the same as quality of life. It's a connection between the materialistic phenomenon and this more spiritual development. And that, you see, once more, the connection between East and West. We have much to learn from Buddhist philosophy, for example. And here in the Western society, Laszlo Solnay, leader of the Business Ethics Center at Corvinus University, Budapest, worked with these ideas. We can say that Richard Welford, a marketing professor in England, says it's inspired from Buddhism, and so on and so forth. Fritjof Capra, for example, the connection between East and West. So I think the time has come to unite the world, say we have to be inspired from each other, instead of using our more dramatic means to be the winner, to say that our culture is better than yours. That's not a good idea. We have to learn from each other.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think that's a very good point to kind of wrap it around in that way, because in one way we have to be looking, cross-culturally and working interculturally and taking, trading, which is something that, is something that the world in general is always in battle with, because there's always this battle between like nationalism and globalism. But then also to wrap it back to, that's what I had on my mind, was this a lot of what we can learn about economy and the way that societies work from these, indigenous societies, especially a lot of like egalitarian, sharing systems and stuff like that. There's a lot to be learned from that. I can see that we're having a wonderful conversation. We're already rounding out towards the end of our time. So I just want to throw in a few more questions. What about like right now, like the state of a lot of economies around the world, where some people, like lots of groups of people, feel like they don't have time to think about stuff like this because they're kind of being crushed by the system. I think about there's that famous George W. Bush quote. He was at a debate and he said, this woman said, "I work 3 jobs, 60 hours a week." And he said, "Oh, isn't that uniquely American?" And of course, so many people around the world are being crushed by economy, really, and can't even take care of their basic needs.
I see the problem, and I agree completely. So, but the thing is that we in the part of the world we have the opportunity to experiment with new ways of living, new ways of organizing the society, because we need a systemic change. That's obvious to solve the problems you are mentioning. But if these people have problems they need some examples. We have to develop examples that are working. And that is what EU says. We want you in the cultural capital of Bodø 2024 to develop examples of how ecological economics can work in practice. And this is, Europe can learn from these experiments in Norway, and Norway can learn from the cooperation with different parts of Europe and the rest of the world, for that matter. So in the project here that I am part of in the cultural capital, the part of the ecological economic part of it, I say that we must have good relations to the Academy of Professional Dialogue in London. We have close connection to Italy, to eco-regions in Italy, very, very interesting project connecting local food for local markets. And we have many different projects in different parts of Europe and the rest of the world that we can learn from and develop further. And the idea here is that it will not be the exactly same solution in different cultural and nature-based context. So the world will be very diverse. There are different solutions all over the world, depending on economy, depending on nature, depending on culture. And here I will refer to Paul Raskins. And he talks about the great transition. And he says, and this is very interesting, he's also talking about utopian thinking and all these things. But what he says is that in different parts of the world, there will be different solutions. One solution could be a very revised version of capitalism. When capitalism is connected to the real world, to nature, to the culture and all these things, we can have elements of the capitalist thinking in such a new society. Other places, he says, socialism, a very reversed version of socialism, could be the solution. In both liberalistic and socialistic solutions today, they are closely connected to mechanistic thinking. So both of them have to change to an organic way of understanding the world. And the third solution, he says, and I think that is very interesting, he says a revised version of anarchism. And here we have a concrete example saying that many of the eco-villages in Norway and Europe and in the US and everywhere, they are based upon the ideas in anarchism, talking about freedom in solidarity. And that is very interesting because it connects the concept of freedom in liberalism and the concept of solidarity in socialist world. So the anarchist connects these things, that maximum freedom in solidarity with other people. And that is a bottom-up initiative. You have to develop rules, norms that you have to follow. And if we are part of the process, then we feel that we are responsible in another way than we will be if the rules and norms come from outside in a way. So this is part of the philosophical tradition, saying if people are engaged, if people are involved, they are more responsible than if the gap between the bottom and the top in the society is increasing. So many possibilities here, and we have to help the people in the deep problems that you are mentioning, and then we have to change the system.
You know, I love this idea of freedom and solidarity, and also looking at, you know, the way that the world is working as more of a system, because it is a system based on the ecology, based on the environment. Because I know I say it a lot on this podcast, but, you know, as much as some people would like to not admit it, we are also part of the environment, you know. Yeah, I mean, as much as maybe theoretically we can talk about the nature culture divide, but actually the culture is a product of the natural world. So we're all working together here. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm going to reach out to the audience and say, if you have any questions about ecological economics, we're happy to take them and mention them next time we meet.
I can recommend the book I wrote in 2019, Anarchism and Ecological Economics. There I have an introduction to utopian thinking and try to connect it to the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Earth Charter. That I think is more interesting in a way, because the Earth Charter is connected to values, norms, ethical thinking in another way than you find in the UN description. So, and also a presentation of the development of anarchist philosophy from the anarchists in the late 18th century and up to Bookchin and other very relevant eco-anarchists today. So
yeah, I recommend everybody check out some of Ova's books. I mean, just to give you an idea of the last 5 titles, we have here Circulation Economics, another book called Integral Ecology and Sustainable Business. And then, in 2018, Anarchism and Ecological Economics, another one called Transformative Ecological Economics. Sounds like an amazing reading list for 2021. Yeah. All right, Ova. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I really hope we get to have another chat soon, because I know I have a lot more questions. And this is just a huge and really important topic. You know, I think a lot of society really, at the end of the day, we kind of forget about how all of these social structures and all of these kind of environmental problems that we have really have a lot to are maybe centered on our economy. So thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks to Ova for taking the time to share his thoughts and experiences on how to approach the issue of sustainability from this practically universal angle of economy, really. And please make sure to head over to ovajakobsen.com. That's OVEJAKOBSEN.com. And I will certainly leave a link for that in the show notes, and go over there to learn more about Ova's work. And you can find his books and even a 30-minute lecture on ecological economics in English that really explains the practicalities in detail. And remember, send your questions about the episode to me through our website or our social media. Email is transnaturalpod@gmail.com, because Ova will be back in a later episode to answer those questions and go into some more of the specifics of ecological economics. So look, everyone, we might not all be studied economists here, but there's not too many things that are more universal, for better or for worse, than us humans participating in global and local economies. Now, as defined by Paul James and others, that economy is a social domain that emphasizes the practices, discourses, and material expressions associated with the production, use, and management of resources. But, you know, it's not just money that we're talking about here. We're talking about resources, and particularly natural resources. Of course, I'm talking about the environmental resources, but remember, that includes us humans too. It includes how we interact with the more than human inhabitants, how we use and what we do to our bodies, our mind, and our time of the individuals and the collectives, all of us all working together. But to what ends? I really love how Ova and ecological economics kind of flips the script on this idea of a utopia. It's not an ideal, but it's a necessity. And that being stuck in the good old days, in our old unsustainable ways, are actually no way to attain what we call the good life for all. And that's our transnatural perspectives for today, everyone. If you like what you hear on the podcast and you find value in this work, head on over to our website where you can read the blog. Give me a shout, and please, speaking of economics, please consider becoming a supporter of the show for just a few dollars, euros, kroner, whatever it is a month. This is going to help me keep doing what I'm doing and a whole lot more so that we together can make the world a more sustainable place. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and until next time, get outside, get some perspective. Greetings, everyone. This is your host, Josh here. Happy to say that the Transnatural Perspectives podcast is brought to us by listeners like you. If you find value in this show and you want to help it grow, please consider sharing this podcast, writing a review, and supporting the show. Head on over to transnaturalperspectives.com to learn more about how you can contribute as a monthly subscriber, as a one-time donor, as well as check out our blog. I invite you to contact me with any ideas you have for the show. If you'd like to be a guest, if you need a writer, or any other tips on further funding opportunities. I'd really love to hear from you. It keeps this show going, it keeps me going. And with that being said, thanks for listening.